Hey everyone, welcome again to another episode of Disability Landscape. I'm your host, Charlie Bros. With me as usual, at least today, is Mark Knutson, my co-host. Mark, who do we have today and what are we going to talk about?
Well, today it's going to be, I'm looking forward to it because we have the executive director from the Minnesota Council of Disability, David Dively. Welcome to Disability Landscape, David.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. I really appreciate being here. It's an honor and looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I know that, the Minnesota Council of the Disabled has a wide variety of responsibilities, but just to start off kind of in a nutshell, you want to just kind of explain kind of a high level and then we'll go down from there what the council is.
Absolutely. Yes. So just to introduce myself, so my name is David Dively. I'm a white male. I'm hard of hearing and I have other disabilities as well. And I am in my visual description for anyone who might be blind or low vision. I'm bald and I'm in my basement den with some flags and background shelving behind me, books and posters and things. So the Minnesota Council on Disability is approximately 40 years old. So it's one of the older independent agencies. And what that means is that while we're part of the state enterprise for human resources and things like that, we're outside of the governor's cabinet, which means that we set our own public policy priorities, agendas, and we have the legislative authority to advocate for, with, against, together, legislators, the governor's initiatives as our council deems appropriate based on the interests of people with disabilities. So the way we're structured is we're basically like a nonprofit kind of stuck inside of the state government. So we have a governing council that's represented by statute that it requires folks from each what are called economic districts, so basically regions across the state. And one person from each of those regions comes together. And so we have a big geographic diversity in our council. And then also a majority of our council members themselves must have a disability. And almost all of them actually end up having a disability or are a provider for services or a parent, something to that nature. We, like I said, we have a governing council. We work often with the state legislature. We work often with state government enterprise, such as Department of Education or Human Services or Health. And then also we do a lot of work working with our nonprofit advocacy partners and activists to amplify their voices as well. So that's kind of the short snippet of how we're structured. Yeah. And then the kind of what we do is there's kind of four buckets. So one is policy and advocacy, which might be considered our main bucket, which we can get into with our session that just ended and the one coming up in the future here. The other one is a technical resource. So agencies or local government units might come to us and say, we're looking at building this or planning this. Could you provide some technical information about ADA compliance or building code, things like that, best practices? Also, citizens can ask us, right? This is happening to me. I need some information. Can you provide technical information here? We also do training across public sector and private sector about disability etiquette, disability culture, disability rights. And then lastly, we do some work in the workers' compensation field for folks who, as a result of on-the-job injury, become permanently disabled. The Minnesota Council on Disability ensures that they get the proper home modifications to remain independent and integrated into their home and communities where they live. So those are kind of the four big buckets that we work in.
Okay. So then I guess starting at the top with you then, is your position like an elected position, or I mean, how long do you have your position? How does that work for as far as your position is related?
That's a great question, Mark. So this position is one of the few positions in state government that is an at-will position. So the council is my boss as a whole. And
Okay.
when they act as a whole, not any one individual member, but as a whole, they're the boss, and they are in charge of hiring and terminating the executive director through council votes. So I'm not elected in a voting sense or appointed by the governor, but the governor appoints their council members, and then they go on to supervise and potentially hire or fire the executive director. So I serve at their pleasure, similar to how a nonprofit executive director or CEO would serve at the board's pleasure.
Oh, that's yes, yeah, that's interesting because in my mind, I really honestly, I really didn't know, but I thought maybe it was the other way around. I thought maybe the governor, someone of that type appointed you. I didn't realize it was that the council did it, which really makes sense because with the council and those individuals, with the experience of disabilities, they're the closest, knowing
That's right.
what needs to be done. So, like I said, yeah, no, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's
Charlie,
great because that means that the folks who these are members of the public. A lot of them are, some of them are professionals, but some of them are just individuals with lived experiences. And if we're going to be truly an independent state agency, then we want to make sure that the decisions we make, the votes we take, the work that we do doesn't depend on our governor's prerogatives, or otherwise we're not really independent, right? So having a council member full of people whom, after they're appointed, are independent and can make those decisions that they select the leader of the agency, really pushes that ability for us to advocate and be independent.
Okay. So, David, one of the functions of the Council on Disability is the legislative agenda that you might have. How did you guys fare with this year's agenda? Did you reach some of your goals? And where are you looking for the next year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'll be honest, I came on board as the executive director last year in around September. So we're getting close to a year now. And at that time we were, of course, I was a COVID hire, so to speak. So I've not really worked a day in our actual offices, which is fascinating. And we had just in the following month or so gotten the Minnesota Management and Budget releases its projections on the financial state of the government and how much money we've brought in and how much we're spending. And we were looking at a really strong deficit. And so we were actually really in a defensive posture going into session, saying, how can we protect services, supports, and rights for Minnesotans with disabilities, less about advancing or improving access or adding funding, because when it comes time for deficits, we're a balanced budget state. Somewhere the money has to get cut from, right? So that was the initial posture, but we did have a few minor or low policy agenda items that we still wanted to achieve. And as the course of the session went on, as we got better and better financial news, we became more and more assertive about and ambitious about our goals. So I can review a couple of our wins, and I don't want to take credit MCD entirely. Some of this work is also supported by other groups and collaborative partners and advocates, and certainly legislative members themselves are the ones voting, right? So we push for things and advocate, but we don't. We're not the whole thing, the whole story. One of ours was that there's a small discrepancy between the Human Rights Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the gist of it is that a recent Minnesota Supreme Court decision ruled that, based on the exact language of the Minnesota Human Rights Act, as it was written pre-ADA, there's no right for a Minnesotan who, in a workplace situation, to have that informal interactive process conversation. And that's that conversation where a supervisor might discuss what kind of accommodations an employee might need in order to be an effective and successful employee.
Okay.
They ruled that does not apply to the Human Rights Act. And although legally it would still be a mandate under the ADA, that means that Minnesotans wouldn't have a state level advocacy or enforcement group to go to resolve that issue. So they have to go to a federal court, file with the Department of Justice, things like that are more burdensome and cumbersome. There's bigger barriers to ensuring our civil rights. So we push for adding that essentially same language right into our Human Rights Act so that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights could receive that complaint if it occurred and act on it at the state level. And that
Okay.
one did pass into law. And so we're in better compliance and alignment with our federal ADA law as one example. There's a couple other bigger wins though, really. First of all, PCA services have been expanded to allow for increased utilization. So it's not more hours that a client would receive, but they can choose to use the hours that they've been given through their waiver services to have their PCA drive them to places like a doctor's appointment. So
Okay.
instead of having someone else transport them, like non-emergency medical transportation or a taxi or Metro Mobility, they could have their PCA drive them and then also provide PCA services when they arrive. Previously, that was not a billable service allowed under those PCAs. So having that increased ability for people with disabilities to be a part of their community and to be going out and being a part of integrated into their community is a big win for us across the state. Along the PCA lines, we also, the SEIU 8 is the labor union that negotiates and represents PCA workers, was able to get an increase in wages for PCA providers, the actual employees themselves, not the companies that run or coordinate the services. So that's a big win because we have too much turnover with PCAs. It's when someone loses a PCA, it can take them months to get someone to replace them, and that's a big burden and barrier for those people. So increasing the payment rate that those employees get is big. We also created a rate infrastructure that will increase the amount that PCA providers can bill for so that they can also have a better operating business to provide PCA services. So there's a lot there in the PCA world that we're really excited to see coming out. And those are some of the big wins. One of the biggest wins is the study and grant funding for what's called sub-minimum wage. And there's a move nationally and in other states to stop what's called 14C or sub-minimum wage employment. And those are folks who earn less than minimum wage because typically an intellectual or developmental disability. And the law was passed this year that there would be a study and a 5-year transition period for Minnesota to kind of do an off-road off of that program and to not allow that in the state, and then ensure through grant funding and support and study how we can ensure no one kind of gets lost in that. It ensures that people are still have a reason to work. They still have a passion in their life. They still have activities to be a part of. We don't want anyone to fall through the cracks. So that's what that grant funding is for.
And David, the last point there on the subminimum, that also applies to persons like in workshops, correct? Is that the kind of
Yes, it would.
The group there?
That's a common environment where that would be the case. Yep.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, because I was gonna say, the PCA part is always such a big challenge, and has one of the biggest effects because it just affects people's personal care. If you don't need a PCA, you just don't understand the impact of it. Fortunately, for me and Charlie, we're independent, but having friends that do need the PCA, people just can't. They just don't understand that big challenge.
Absolutely. And then we saw that during COVID, right? We saw folks who were unable to get PCA services. Some of the horror stories of, sitting in their bed for days on end and not being able to toilet and properly, have proper hygiene and cleanliness. And we saw the consequences of ineffective or no PCA services and how really dehumanizing that can be. And it's really unfortunate. So so big wins there to improve our PCA infrastructure in Minnesota. And
then the other thing I was, like you said, you came on board last September, so you were kind of late to the party as far as planning was concerned. But when a session for now, like, with this next session, I mean, I'm sure you've already, when does the planning and all that start for an upcoming session? Because I'm sure you just don't look at the calendar. Oh, January, we're going to have the session. Oh, maybe right before Christmas, we should start thinking what we should be doing. There's got to
That's
be
right.
a lot of planning going on, right?
That's right. Yeah. So to break it down for you, I mean, I'm a little bit exaggerating, but it's basically, the next day after session ends. It's not exactly, but it feels like that. So we go through a few steps. We have, we want to make sure that because the Council on Disability is charged with essentially advocating and protecting and advancing the rights of all types of disabilities across the entire state, across all types of life. So education, employment, healthy aging, independent living, access to housing, transportation, so it's just this huge, broad swath of responsibility that we have. And so we want to make sure that we're balancing the types of disabilities that we're advocating for, the types of services, employment versus education versus, so on and so forth. So part of that is checking and seeing if there's areas that we've not been active enough in. We also do some surveys where our council is our governing body. So we put out a survey and say, here are the approximately 12 issues that we kind of have buckets in that are kind of general buckets of say improved education, something like that. And send out a survey and say, what are your priorities right now? And have we missed something? And we collect that information in and we sort through that. We also send it to some community members and thought leaders or disability advocacy partners. And we bring that together. And then we look at what might be controversial and what might not be controversial. Sometimes controversial is okay, but non-controversial is certainly easier to pass into law. Right.
Yeah,
and then what would be non-funding and what would have funding implications. So we look at all those kind of pieces, and then we have to present it to our council and say, this is our proposal, but you all have to agree and vote and reflect that in the official record that this is your agenda. We really act on their approval. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So because they're really the strategic big picture level leaders of the agency. So that's all that to say is we just had a council meeting a few days ago where we showed them our early results of where we think we're going. We probably have another month or two before it's really ironed out entirely, but we have there's significant ARP one-time money that the state has earmarked to potentially utilize or find ways to spend about to the tune of about $1.2 billion next year.
Wow.
And then what looks to be, it's early, but what looks to be a pretty healthy surplus. Our tax revenues are much higher than projected each time they put out a new report. And so we might have some opportunities for ongoing funding and then also one-time funding. And then so developing priorities that might fit one versus the other. So.
Okay. Now, is the planning different year over year because, we have like the bonding years with the legislature versus, other agendas? How does your planning work in that respect?
Absolutely. That's 100% true. So this coming year is a bonding / policy year. So they do typically do a supplemental budget, but it's in the word, it's supplemental. It's not something they have to do. And it's normally much, much smaller than the budget they pass that keeps the government operational. And so the focus is on, ensuring that bonding projects are accessible, make sure they're, ADA compliant. Are there areas where there are state buildings or facilities that could use bonding funding to increase their accessibility in remodeling their infrastructure. This would also be a year where we would look at things that have less of a fiscal or financial cost, because the dollars coming out for government agency side of things is going to be smaller than, say, the session we just had. That was primarily the budget year where they did do a bonding initiative, but that was the one that they didn't have to do. So it's much
Right.
smaller. So we kind of go back and forth between our budget year and our bonding or policy year and back and forth. And so we definitely need to design our agenda around the reality that they might not pass a supplemental budget at all. And so anything that costs money is just not going to happen. Right. So,
Right.
so we definitely have to keep that in mind every other year. So,
Okay.
Yeah,
Mark?
so with I know in the past, typically I should for sure say, with the state fair coming, just a matter of week or so away, typically, I know the council is out at the state fair. Will you guys, be out there this year with the COVID stuff going on?
yeah, we put a lot of thought into that. That's an excellent question, Mark. Thank you. So early in the spring, we began the process, and we did register for a booth, and we did pay for our insurance and all the stuff that goes along with it. It's not a cheap process, and we actually are in the process of developing a video project to kind of memorialize the struggles and lived experiences of people with disabilities through the COVID era to show on video at the fair. And it'd be fully accessible with interpreting and captioning and audio description, the whole 9 yards. Apologies for any background noise. But we were also expecting that things would be getting better throughout the summer, and that has not happened. We have a lot of resistance to safety protocols, whether it's masking or vaccinations or crowd sizes. And so just yesterday on the 12th, we as a council put out an open letter calling on our government leaders and our state fair leaders to do better. The idea that it can be safe for some people, but folks with disabilities, you shouldn't come, it's not safe for you, really flies in the face of the integration, the rights of folks with disabilities. And it's frankly, we're done kind of being the second or third or fourth priority. And it's not okay. We don't think that's an acceptable answer. And we think that we can do better. And someone has to step up and say that. And so we as a council decided to make the difficult decision not to attend the state fair. We felt that if we were to be there, we'd reinforce the message to society that it's okay that people with disabilities aren't as important as the other demographic they have in mind when they design protocols and safety and distancing and things like that. If they're not going to enforce safety measures that make it safe for people with disabilities to be there, then we're sending the wrong message if we attend. So just this week, we made that decision and wrote this open letter, and we stand behind it. And we're getting, frankly, a lot of really positive support around this message. And we're hoping other partners and leaders will notice.
Okay. Mark, do you have a follow-up
Yeah,
on that? Ben?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, that pretty much, I agree with you. I mean, that pretty much really puts it in a nutshell. Me and Charlie just a couple weeks ago, I live down in Jordan, by the Scott County Fair. We went to the Scott County Fair, but that was nice because it's not packed like the state fair. So we were able to, be in very limited crowds and keep the exposure really low, where at the state fair, man, they just get throngs of people. If I were to go, I'm not a state fair person to begin with, but if I were, I would go early in the morning when there's hardly anyone there and that. So no, I totally agree with your decision. I guess the thing, I'd like to change subjects a little bit and thinking about the council again. I know I'm pretty sure you're not the only person on staff at the council. What is like you said, you also have the council members, but who is actually, well, I was gonna say in office, but in home office nowadays? What is the structure? Who's that kind of the paid staff of the council?
Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, so we do have many more staff than just me. And so we have Linda Gramillion. She coordinates our programming and kind of our office admin finance. We have Trevor Turner, who does our public policy work as our director there. We have Cody Olson, who's a disability policy advisor for state of emergencies, public health, civil unrest, whenever those executive orders kick in for the emergency operations, to be a policy advisor to ensure folks have access. We have Shannon, who's our executive secretary. We're working on hiring soon a new communications professional. We have Chad, who's our digital accessibility coordinator, to make sure all of our content is fully accessible. I'm sure I'm missing some folks. We have Margot Cross, who does accessibility. She's really a building code expert and accessibility expert. Then we have David Fenley, our ADA coordinator / ADA director, really disability law in general, more than just the ADA. And then I apologize if I'm missing anyone, but you're all great. I love you all. Yeah, so there's a fair share, and almost all of us are full time, and we're all working teleworking for the near future.
That's a nice cover at the end there, David.
Yes, I had to throw that out there.
Right. I was going to say,
the
I always
rumor
like,
has it a friend of ours is joining your group here in very shortly. In
Okay.
communications, Brittany.
We are excited to have our new comms person, and it will be another week or so, and we're really thrilled.
well, cool. No, it's been really great to meet you and learn a lot more about the console itself and that. And we are at that time when Charlie tells me, Mark, it's time for you to be quiet and time for this show to wrap it up. So I'll let Charlie finish it up here.
All righty. Yeah, thank you to Mark Knudsen, my partner, and for David Dively with Minnesota Council on Disability. Great stuff. It's nice to know that you guys are out there to help push the agenda for those of us who are in the disabled community, and we appreciate your efforts every day. So this has been Charlie Bros. You've been watching Disability Landscape. We'll see you next time.